The following content is intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. Viewer discretion is strongly advised. This is the verbatim federal courtroom testimony of the Sean Diddy Combs trial as reported by Inner City Press. No edits, no filters, just the raw truth, straight from inside the courtroom. Chapter 1. We thought Diddy was just eccentric, we were wrong. I used to think Sean Diddy Combs was just one of those over-the-top music moguls. Loud, flashy, a little controversial, but harmless, really. That was before I heard the things I did, before the testimonies, before the video, before Jane, before Mia, before the brave hotel security guard who said no to $100,000 in hush money. That's when I realized this wasn't about drama or clout. This was about something deeply broken. You grow up idolizing people like Diddy. The parties, the lifestyle, the endless string of hits. He was larger than life. Everyone in the room seemed to revolve around him, gravitating toward his charisma like moths to a flame. But no one ever stopped to ask what burned inside that flame. I wish we had. What's come to light in this trial has not only shattered illusions, it's shaken the core of how we think about power, celebrity, and accountability. I'm not a journalist or a lawyer. I'm just someone who's been paying attention. And from everything I've read, seen, and heard, the image we had of Sean Combs doesn't come close to the reality. Let's start with the environment he built around himself. It wasn't just fame, it was insulation. Diddy didn't just surround himself with yes men. He built a system where no was never an option. Assistants, managers, hotel staff, security, many of them turned the other way. Some were paid to, some were too afraid. Others, perhaps, were just too dazzled to see clearly. He wasn't just a man with money. He was a man who knew how to use it strategically, surgically. Whether it was rent, a job offer, or a promise to launch someone's career, he made sure the people around him owed him something. That debt, that was leverage. And leverage like that, when held in the wrong hands, becomes terrifying. Then came the stories. First from Cassie Ventura, his longtime partner. Then from Jane, then Mia. All under pseudonyms, all under protection, all carrying pieces of the same horrifying puzzle. These women weren't just ex-partners with a grudge, they were survivors. Survivors of manipulation, coercion, and, allegedly, physical abuse. Jane's testimony was especially hard to hear. She described a world where Diddy dictated when she could sleep, who she could talk to, and where she could go. Where hotel nights weren't romantic getaways, but dark, coercive episodes of what she called freak-offs, a term many in the inner circle were disturbingly familiar with. She described moments where consent was no longer present, where escape wasn't possible, and where the threat of violence, explicit or implied, hovered constantly. One of the most haunting parts wasn't even her words, it was the security footage. A surveillance tape from a luxury hotel that allegedly showed Diddy striking a woman, dragging her. The existence of multiple hotel employees have testified under oath about attempts to destroy that footage. Diddy's security team, allegedly, offered stacks of cash, $100,000, to make it disappear. And for a moment, it almost did. Several took the money. One didn't. One man refused. Instead, he took a risk. He filmed the security monitor with his own phone before leaving for the weekend. That clip would later reach CNN and become the opening exhibit in the case. Ask yourself, how many people did it take to protect one man from accountability? How many systems failed before one person stood up? In court, Diddy's defense has tried to frame this as complicated relationships, blurred lines, exaggerated claims. But let me be clear. When multiple women from different timelines describe the same pattern of coercion and abuse, when they say they were afraid to leave, when one of them runs barefoot through a hallway only to be dragged back, that is not a relationship. That's control. That's domination. That's trauma. And what about the public? Many still see Diddy as a cultural icon, a pioneer, a brand. He is that, yes, but those things are not armor against the truth. You can be a genius and a danger at the same time. Talent doesn't excuse terror. This chapter isn't meant to be a takedown. It's a reckoning, a reminder that power, when unchecked, corrodes everything around it. That no one is too big to be questioned. And that sometimes, behind the glitz and glamour, lies something much darker. The trial continues. More witnesses will speak. But for those of us watching, reading, listening, we already know enough to start asking harder questions about him, about the people who enabled him, about the world that let it happen, and maybe, just maybe, about what we choose to celebrate. Chapter 2. Diddy called them parties. The women called it survival. We've all heard about Diddy's infamous parties, those all-white extravaganzas in Miami, the star-studded gatherings in the hills, the invite-only nights at luxury hotels. From the outside, they looked like dreams. A-list celebrities, champagne towers, private performances, the kind of scenes that feed music videos and tabloid headlines. But inside some of those rooms, away from the Instagram reels and polished PR, a much darker reality existed. They weren't just parties, not to everyone. According to multiple testimonies, including those of Jane, Mia, and earlier, Cassie Ventura, these so-called gatherings often involved more than dancing and drinks. There were rules, there were expectations, and for some women, there was no such thing as no. Let's be clear, not everyone was forced, not every guest walked away traumatized. But what's become increasingly apparent is that certain women, especially those Diddy had close personal ties with, were not attending as equals. They were participants in something far more disturbing, often under silent pressure. Some were told who to interact with. Some were given substances without clarity. And some were, allegedly, assigned to private rooms for freak-offs, a term that keeps surfacing in this case. If you're wondering what that means, you're not alone. Witnesses describe it as coordinated sexual encounters that Diddy either orchestrated, participated in, or demanded. What's chilling is that for many of these women, the choice wasn't really theirs to make. Jane said it plainly in court. At first, it felt taboo, but after a while, I wasn't allowed to say no. That statement has stayed with me. Imagine walking into a room knowing that saying no could mean the end of your housing, your income, your protection. That the man orchestrating it all held more than just social power. He held control over your basic stability. That's not seduction. That's coercion dressed as luxury. And yet, the world called them epic. Celebrities posted selfies from the events. Fashion magazines covered the guest lists. No one questioned what happened after the cameras were put away. No one asked what happened behind closed doors. According to Mia, a former assistant, these encounters weren't just encouraged, they were sometimes scheduled. Diddy allegedly used his inner team to coordinate these nights, making sure women were ready, rooms were cleared, and no one without clearance got too close. It wasn't spontaneous, it was orchestrated. The control went beyond just that. Jane wasn't allowed to lock her bedroom door. Male staff, guards, assistants were given privacy. She wasn't. Diddy could enter at any time, and often did. One staffer testified that some of the women were off-limits to other men, unless Diddy approved otherwise. It was a system, a hierarchy of access, and Diddy sat at the very top, dictating who did what with whom and when. What's more harrowing is how many people knew. According to court documents and depositions, some of his staff expressed discomfort. A few even quit, but most stayed. Whether out of fear, loyalty, or financial gain, no one blew the whistle for years. And that's the part that's hard to process. Not just what Diddy allegedly did, but what others allowed him to do. The silence, the complicity, the quiet nods and closed eyes that kept everything running smoothly on the surface. When the prosecution played a series of voice messages during the trial, jurors reportedly looked stunned. In one, Diddy allegedly berated a woman for not performing properly. In another, he reminded her what he paid for. The tone wasn't just controlling, it was dehumanizing. a person reduced to a role, a transaction, a product. The defense has tried to frame all this as part of a consensual adult lifestyle. Alternative, yes, but voluntary. But how do you define consent when the alternative is eviction, humiliation, or violence? This isn't just about scandal anymore. It's about structure, about how power can twist even the most glamorous spaces into arenas of exploitation, about how predators can wear designer suits and host award shows and still be the architects of trauma when the lights go down. We often ask, why didn't they leave? But here's the truth. When someone like Diddy controls your career, your rent, your reputation, leaving isn't a door you can just walk through. Sometimes it's locked, sometimes it's invisible. And sometimes you don't even realize you've been trapped until you're already too deep. As Jane said, it wasn't just fear of him, it was fear of losing everything. And that's what these parties were for some. Tests of survival dressed up as luxury, stages for dominance disguised as fun, and reminders that sometimes the brightest lights are hiding the darkest truths. "5 noon. Text messages. The man who refused the money. Scappering par. For mourning all of the 6 leaks, court provided stats. 1440. In tight place, I scient and Ren with battle project. This tape I have following. As a kins of theiring that man was holding provided way. These tape I was hone was all done. Chapter 1. The only $6,000 in diance are using more provides mansalong trageds legals, but not in frees who play the following all is the case. Surveillance footage from the Intercontinental Hotel in Los Angeles. According to court filings and multiple witnesses, it shows Sean Diddy Combs physically assaulting a woman. Pulling her, striking her, dragging her down a hallway. No narration, no edits, just raw security footage. And for a moment, it almost vanished. According to testimony from hotel staff and security personnel, shortly after the incident occurred, Combs' team allegedly moved fast. Not to apologize, not to take responsibility, but to erase the evidence. That's when the money came out. $100,000. That's the amount reportedly offered in cash to the hotel's head of security in exchange for the footage. Not a legal request, not a subpoena, just a direct payoff allegedly delivered in a duffel bag by one of Diddy's bodyguards. This wasn't speculation. This was sworn testimony. One security guard described how the bribe was divided. $50,000 to the head of security. The remaining $50,000 split among 2 other guards on duty. 3 men took the money, but one didn't. His name hasn't been made public, for safety, for privacy. But his decision changed everything. He was the first to see the video, and he knew something was wrong. As he described in court, he worried that by the time he returned to work after the weekend, the tape might disappear. So he did something bold and smart. He pulled out his phone and recorded the footage off the monitor, just in case. He said that he didn't take the money. He didn't delete the original footage. Instead, he made a copy for himself, not to profit, but to protect. According to prosecutors, that very recording is what eventually reached CNN. And that's the clip that opened the government's case in court. That man didn't just preserve a video, he preserved proof. In a case surrounded by whispers and denial, this was something undeniable. Ask yourself how many people would have done what he did. This wasn't just a celebrity tantrum. It was evidence of physical abuse. And when the stakes rose, when 6 figures were on the table to make it go away, 3 said yes. Only 1 said no. In court, that man testified under immunity. He had nothing to gain. No book deal, no fame, just the truth. And as he described the night it happened, how he was shown the money, how the others pressured him, how he went home with the footage on his phone, you could feel the gravity in the room shift. It's easy to look at this case as something distant, something Hollywood. But moments like this remind us, Justice often comes down to individuals. Quiet people, regular people, people who choose what's right over what's easy. And the sad part? It almost worked. The cover-up, I mean. If that fourth man had gone along, if he had taken the cash and said nothing, there might never have been a trial. Jane's testimony might have been dismissed. Mia's experience might have been questioned. Cassie's civil suit might have faded into another NDA settlement. But because of that one man, and the courage it took to say no to one of the most powerful figures in entertainment, this story didn't end in silence. What followed after that video surfaced was a domino effect. Investigations reopened, witnesses reconsidered, public opinion shifted. Suddenly, the allegations weren't just words. They had weight, visual, visceral, undeniable weight. It's worth repeating. The footage didn't create the abuse. It only confirmed what many had been saying all along. And yet, Diddy's team still tried to downplay it, claimed the incident was taken out of context, suggested it was an argument, not an assault, even implied it was a setup. But a camera doesn't lie. And in that hallway, context wasn't blurry. It was brutal. This chapter of the case isn't about the law exactly. It's about conscience. It's about how systems can be bought, but some people can't. It's about the thin line between silence and action, and how one small act of defiance can change the course of a story that was supposed to stay buried. Diddy once said, "Can't stop, won't stop." Maybe that's true of the music, but when it comes to justice, maybe, just maybe, he finally met someone who could stop him. Chapter 4. Why did they stay? Inside Diddy's grip on the women around him. It's the question that always gets asked, usually by people watching from the outside, often with more judgment than understanding. If it was so bad, why didn't they just leave? But if you've been following the Sean Diddy Combs case, and you've listened, really listened, to the testimony from Jane, Mia, and Cassie Ventura, you'll see that the better question is, how do you leave someone who controls everything? Because what Diddy built around these women wasn't just a romantic relationship, it was a system, a closed circuit of emotional dependence, financial leverage, and psychological manipulation. From the moment they entered his world, these women didn't just get a boyfriend, they got a landlord, a boss, a provider, a gatekeeper, a threat, all wrapped in one. Jane testified that she met Diddy during what she described as the best and worst time of her life. He was magnetic, generous, and, at first, attentive. He showered her with gifts, flew her on private jets, introduced her to icons. But beneath that sparkle, there was a contract she never signed but always felt. He made sure her rent was paid. His name was on the lease. He introduced her to people in the music industry, but those doors didn't stay open unless she behaved. He said he cared, but only if she stayed silent, available, and obedient. Cassie's story followed a similar pattern. She entered the relationship at a young age, before her career had truly taken off. Diddy gave her exposure, but at a price. Behind the red carpet photos and luxury vacations was a deeply unequal dynamic. As her civil suit alleged, she endured years of manipulation, coercion, and eventually, violence. But leaving? That wasn't simple. According to court records, Diddy often reminded his partners, and his staff, what they owed him. One witness recalled him saying, "They need me more than I need them. That's why they'll never go anywhere." And for a long time, he was right. You have to understand, many of these women came from humble beginnings. No rich families, no safety nets. When you grow up without stability, the promise of protection, even toxic protection, can be seductive. Diddy offered more than just wealth. He offered identity, belonging, and in his own twisted way, structure, until it became a cage. It wasn't just love that kept them there, it was fear. Fear of retaliation, fear of losing everything, fear of being blacklisted in the industry, and perhaps most painfully, fear of not being believed. This was Sean Combs, after all, a music mogul, a media brand, a man whose face was on billboards and product deals and Grammy stages, who would listen to a quiet girl with a bruised arm and a broken voice. One former employee who testified anonymously said, "You didn't question him, you just didn't. If a woman cried, we looked away. If someone raised concerns, they were gone the next day." The environment was chillingly loyal, not because everyone admired him, but because they feared him. And still, there were moments when the women tried to leave. Jane described once packing a bag after a violent encounter. Diddy intercepted her in the hallway. No threats, just a quiet reminder. Where are you going to go that's better than here? That's the cruelty of this kind of power. It convinces you that abuse is your best option, that discomfort is luxury, that silence is safety. Even long after some of them managed to physically separate from Diddy, the psychological grip remained. Some still relied on him for rent, for career opportunities, even for protection from others in his circle. For every attempt at freedom, there was a reminder that he still had reach. And perhaps the most painful part? Sometimes they missed him. That's something people struggle to understand, that a victim can long for the same person who hurt them. But it's not because they're confused, it's because trauma doesn't always look like escape. It often looks like nostalgia, like guilt, like self-blame. Jane said it best in one of her quieter moments on the stand. "He made me feel like I didn't exist unless he was looking at me." That is not love. That's erasure disguised as affection, and it's what kept her and so many others coming back. So the next time someone asks, why didn't they leave? Remember, some prisons don't have bars. Some captors wear cologne, and some stories take years before anyone is finally ready to tell them. Chapter 5. Diddy didn't act alone. How silence became his most valuable asset. If there's one thing that's become painfully clear throughout this trial, it's this. Diddy didn't act alone. Yes, his name is the one on the headlines. Yes, it's his voice on the recordings, his face on the security footage, his hands behind the power plays. But as more witnesses take the stand, another truth has emerged, one just as damning. He had help. Lots of it. And no, we're not talking about help in the traditional sense. This wasn't a well-meaning assistant who got manipulated or a bodyguard who didn't understand what was happening. This was a system, a network, built around him, for him, by him. Let's start with the staff. According to courtroom testimony, Diddy's personal security team wasn't just there to protect him from danger. They were allegedly there to protect him from consequences. Multiple witnesses say they saw these men escort women into rooms, monitor exits, and make sure no one saw what wasn't meant to be seen. When the surveillance video from the Intercontinental Hotel showed Diddy allegedly assaulting a woman, what followed wasn't a moment of accountability. It was a mission to cover it up. Witnesses say his security team immediately started offering money to destroy the footage. Not just to one person, but everyone in the security chain of command. They weren't confused, they weren't panicking, they were following orders. But it didn't stop there. There were assistants, some of whom scheduled the private sessions with other men, booked hotel suites under shell names, and even helped screen which women could come to certain parties. According to Mia's testimony, one assistant warned her early on. If he calls, you answer. If he says no, it's no. If he says yes, don't ask why. That wasn't protocol, that was indoctrination. There were managers and legal teams who, based on documents presented in court, drafted airtight NDAs for women who had incidents with Diddy. Settlements were pushed through quietly, payments made through intermediaries. Silence was written into contracts, not just expected, but required. There were hotel employees, concierges, bellmen, drivers who were tipped to look away. One even admitted on the stand that he was paid extra to never ask questions when the girls came in crying. That was his job description. Don't see, don't speak. And then there were the celebrities. Let's be careful here. Not everyone who went to a Diddy party is guilty of anything. Most people probably had no idea what went on behind closed doors. But some had to know. They saw the way he treated certain women. They saw bruises. They heard rumors. They noticed who suddenly stopped showing up. And they said nothing. Because Diddy was the kingmaker. You crossed him, you didn't just lose a friend, you lost access. To industry, to connections, to wealth. So people played along, took the gifts, laughed at the jokes, enjoyed the lifestyle, and ignored the shadows behind it. One insider put it this way: it wasn't that people didn't believe something was happening, it's that they didn't want to believe. Because if they did, they'd have to act. And no one wanted to risk what he could take away from them. This is the real power of a man like Diddy. Not just the money or the fame, but the aura, the untouchability, the understanding that he was too big to fall, because too many people were holding him up. And when you surround yourself with enough people willing to say nothing, you don't have to hide anymore. You just operate in plain sight. That's what makes this case so important. It's not just about proving what one man did. It's about exposing how he did it and who helped make it possible. And the scariest part? Most of those people still haven't been held accountable. In court, some of them are testifying now under immunity. Others have quietly left the industry. A few are still working in the same circles, hoping the spotlight never turns their way. But the truth is, if this story only ends with one conviction, we've missed the bigger picture. Because predators don't survive in a vacuum. They need infrastructure. They need silence. And sometimes, they need people who know exactly what they're doing and choose to keep doing it anyway. So yes, Diddy is on trial, but he's not the only one who should be explaining themselves. Chapter 6. The Women Who Spoke, and the silence they finally broke. For years it was just rumors, whispers behind closed doors, industry gossip dismissed with a smirk or a shrug. That's just Diddy, people would say. He's intense. He parties hard. He's complicated. But then, one by one, the women started speaking. Cassie, Jane, Mia, and others who still haven't named themselves publicly, but whose stories are now echoing across courtrooms and headlines. They were quiet for so long, not because they weren't hurting, but because silence had been the cost of survival. Until finally they said, enough. Cassie Ventura was the first domino. Her civil lawsuit in late 2023 alleged nearly a decade of abuse, manipulation, and coercion. She wasn't just suing a former partner. She was going up against a global brand, a media mogul, and a man known for retaliating against anyone who crossed him. Within 24 hours of filing, the case was quietly settled. Many thought that was the end, but it wasn't. It was just the beginning. Cassie's story gave others the courage to come forward. That's when Jane stepped into the courtroom. Her testimony wasn't just emotional, it was surgical. She walked the jury through years of psychological manipulation, the pressure to participate in freak-offs, and the terrifying realization that leaving might be more dangerous than staying. She wasn't speaking for fame. She wasn't reading from a script. She was raw, trembling at times, but clear, and what she said cut through everything. He didn't see me as a person. He saw me as something he could control. Then came Mia, a former assistant. Her words carried the weight of someone who had once admired him, only to witness what she described as systematic degradation. She spoke of unlocked doors, unspoken rules, and the constant fear of doing something wrong. And she spoke of complicity, of staff who looked away, of employees who joked about the girls and knew exactly what that meant. But maybe the most powerful thing wasn't what they said, it was how they said it. No theatrics, no outbursts, just honesty, painful, clear honesty. They remembered everything, the dates, the threats, the bruises, the way Diddy's voice changed when he didn't get what he wanted. The promises he made to get them to stay, the fear he used when they tried to leave. It wasn't just the court that was listening, the world was. For decades, men like Diddy moved through industries untouched, not because no one knew, but because no one could stop them. They built empires on silence, on NDAs, on whispered warnings in green rooms and back offices, on the reality that in Hollywood, money always talks louder than morality. Until now. Jane didn't have a PR team behind her. Mia wasn't flanked, and what we learned through them is something every industry, every community, every courtroom should remember. There is no such thing as a victim who waited too long. There is only a world that made them wait. When the prosecutor rested their case, it wasn't just about timelines and text messages. It was about trust, about believing women who were once told they'd be nothing without him, and watching them prove the opposite in front of the world. And now, no matter how this trial ends, something irreversible has happened. The silence is broken. People are paying attention. Witnesses are reconsidering. Insiders are nervous. And Diddy, once a symbol of unstoppable influence, is finally answering questions he never thought he'd have to face. We don't know what the jury will decide, but here's what we do know. These women changed the narrative. They shattered the illusion, and they reminded us that justice doesn't always start with a judge. It starts with someone brave enough to speak, and they did.